So Cambodia, as you maybe have heard, has had a very turbulent history. So for most everyone's lives, they've had a very hard life. If we go back in time, Cambodia used to be this great, amazing empire where there was Angkor Wat at its center in what is now known as Siem Reap. So it had this huge different temple complex, and they used to be Hindu, and they were a big empire that had this massive military that controlled most of Southeast Asia. Over time, there are different kingdoms that were established, namely Thailand and Vietnam, and they started to peck off little parts of Cambodia, and eventually got a lot weaker. They moved their capital away from Angkor Wat, moved to Phnom Penh, where there's like where the Donlei Basak rivers and the Mekong River meet. So it's a nice trade port. So they decided to move it there. But actually the Thai were able to conquer Siem Reap, so Cambodia was a bit weak. Cambodia decided to make a deal with France in order to help Cambodia protect itself from its neighbors. But Cambodia got a little bit ungrateful, and long story short, France decided to invade Cambodia, and Cambodia became a province of France called French Indochina, along with Vietnam and Laos. And also later, during the 1940s, there was obviously the Second World War. They were occupied by the Japanese. They had a war for independence against the French, which they won quite easily in 1954. And then later on, Cambodia had a very aristocratic class that was very rich, while most of the people were peasants. During this time, there was a war in Vietnam, so there were a lot of communist insurgency. There were a lot of communist guerrillas out there. And someone that was supported, I think, with communist Chinese funding, named Pol Pot, was able to convince most of the peasants in Cambodia to come and follow him, and he started something called Khmer Kraham, or the Khmer Rouge. He was able to get a group of communist guerrillas, and over the few years he was able to grow his base and was able to attack the city of Phnom Penh, and he was able to overrun the country. So over the next 4 years, Cambodia became a political prison house. All the cities were evacuated. He wanted to make Cambodia a completely primitive society. He wanted to erase everything that was Western, everything that was modern, everything contemporary, so that the people would be able to all live in this communist, perfect, harmonious state, which obviously could not exist if there were bourgeoisie people or other aristocratic people floating around. So all those people were killed or they left the country, and all the people were working in the fields, and they were pretty much working in death camps. He starved the people. He sold all the rice to China in order to get weapons for the Khmer military. And sadly, people got more and more hungry. And what happened was in 1979, Vietnam, knowing that Pol Pot was very vulnerable because his government was obviously very weak, they decided to invade Cambodia. They took over the country, occupied it. And so Pol Pot and his friends were hiding out in the jungles, while most of the people actually decided to leave. They could not stand being in their home country anymore just because they had been through so many problems. Just maybe 2 or 3 million people had died by that point, and millions more had left the country, gone to Thailand or Vietnam or the United States or someplace else, and they were in internment or refugee camps. So a lot of people went to Thailand. So for most of the time, during the 1980s, Cambodia was like the Stone Age. There was no economy there, and most people living there were living under Vietnamese military occupation. But in 1993, the king of Cambodia, who had escaped before the Khmer Rouge had entered, came back there and had declared his new kingdom, and his son was actually the prime minister. But in 1997, the old military puppet leader, Hun Sen, who was backed by the Vietnamese, came back to power, and they had a little bit of a feud. There was a small civil war, and Hun Sen won. So pretty much they've had the same military junta dictator since about 1980 something. His name is Hun Sen. And that pretty much explains the situation since then. There was an election back in 2013. I will say it was a shame. It was a sham election. Like, it didn't really go through the democratic process. There was someone who opposed Hun Sen named Sam Ramsey, and he lost, but we think it's a fraud election. So apparently, pretty much Cambodia has been led under one party called the Cambodian People's Party for the last 30 years or so. And it's not been very good for the people. Like, I think on paper, it's a democratic country, but in reality, not really. They serve limit freedoms. Like, for example, as us missionaries, we cannot engage in aggressive proselyting. That means we can't just knock on doors. We could talk to people as we meet them down the road, but we can't really like knock on people's doors. We can't just sit up, like stand on some box and Dan Jones it. We can't just like hand out all these pamphlets wherever we go. We sort of have to be a little bit more less aggressive. But that sort of explains Cambodia now. So because of all those wars, Cambodia is a very poor country, and they're trying to restart their economy. They're very into the textile industry. They actually grow a lot of rice there, and tourism has also helped the country. But overall, it's still a very poor, very backward, very third world country that is still not quite up to modern standards. Like, for example, technology there is a bit behind. There's like intellectual property rights don't exist there. It's a very fun place though.